Chapter 7 Prophecies and Production Floors. I don't know if I slept last night. 1 minute my eyes were closed, and then a second later my eyes jolted awake when another fist was pounding outside my door. "Omokley, get up now!" yelled the white man. It was pitch black when I jumped out of bed. Cramping calves held me down while my body inched closer towards the door. "What is it?" I asked. "Your timing was off," said the white man. "We can't afford to have you miss another day." "What?" "The scanners recorded you in the factories, but it says you finished work in 28 minutes. That's impossible." "Now go back and see the badge man," said the white man. "Oh, and my legs hurt. I think something's wrong." I paused. Can I see a doctor?" Manuka flashed through my mind when I saw the man's suit turn away from me. "No doctor. Go see the badge man and get back to work," said the white man. It was early, before my shift, and before the morning buzzer woke up my fellow observers. Limping through the hallways toward the programmer's office, the lights flickered on. Crouching low, I steadied myself ready for the morning shift. The giant gears were about to turn. Somewhere the captain of our vessel was ready to dig, and so I backed against the wall and braced my body. In just a moment, our vessel would dredge another step lower. I waited, and I listened, but I couldn't feel a thing. Then all at once, I heard the beds vibrating in each room. But only the dormitories had felt the shift. The hallway never moved. But how? I wondered. When I reached the cubicles, the programmers were half asleep watching the screens from the night before. I stepped inside when all at once every employee jolted awake as 2 digits appeared on the main screen. The number 28 stayed illuminated while I walked to Levi's desk. And it was easy to find Levi because both his feet were on his desk with his hands behind his head. He'd been taking a nap with a smile beaming across his face. "Levi, the white man sent me back." "Nothing's wrong, Omokley. The number said you'd be back today." 28 minutes. Huh, said Levi. He brought his legs to the floor and stared into my eyes. Everyone around him was in a terrible panic, as if the digits had reached an unreasonable sequence, and yet Levi's screen was the same as everyone else's. Now the number 28 was flashing on the main screen over and over again. "It's happening," Levi whispered. "Do you know what today is? It's December 28th. The number 28 was popping up on everyone's screen and moving even faster than before. "Did you hear me? It's happening," said Levi, "and all the numbers know it to be true." I should have been in the factories, like all the other observers, but here I was watching the same number on Jane's door flash in front of me. "This is the law, and the numbers know the truth," said Levi, tapping the screen. "These digits know everything about how it happens, and it's always changing, all the time, all around us, and today is when it starts." "What's happening, Levi?" "The prophecy. Once we take Jane's tunnel, everything changes." "Well, I've got a few questions for you." "Good, because questions are more important than answers," said Levi. "First, what if you're crazy from staring at screens all day? I've observed it before." "And what if I'm not?" he asked. "Question number 2. Now why is this happening?" "Exactly," said Levi. "Why would the numbers know if the suits don't?" He stood up and grabbed my face with both hands. My eyes were peering into his. "Those suits don't have a clue," said Levi. He grabbed a bag under his desk while the number 28 repeated on each monitor. All these employees were so focused on the numbers that nobody saw him escorting me past all the desks. No one could take his or her eyes off the screens. When we got into the hallway, a line of orange jumpsuits were making their way to the factories while red dots recorded everything from above. They were following the leader back to work just like every other day. Levi tried to push me into the hall, but I pushed him back. "And how do I know you're not working for the white man?" I paused and looked up at the red dots flashing above. "The cameras aren't real," said Levi. "It's just a battery and a red light to make you think they're watching." That's what he wanted me to think. That's what the suits would tell him to say. Then what else did the numbers say? "It's happened before. Only one man was ever brave enough to disobey the order, and he was just like you. He turned the other way 28 years ago today," said Levi. The line of orange employees continued following the leader while no one stopped to listen or change directions. They were so afraid, and not one soul dared to tattle on the man who turned the other way. There's only one other person who ever stepped out of line. He's the only one who ever got away, said Levi. I'd heard of a man like that. Rumors said he tried to run. It happened just days after I got my orange uniform, because I remember making one of my very first observations during the day he ran. The order confiscated our notebooks after that, as if it never even happened. So Ditto was real? Of course he was, said Levi. But I don't understand. There's no time. It's now or never. Tomorrow they'll realize your badge isn't broken, and they'll have a different programmer look at it. Someone who's clueless about the prophecy, and I'll never see you again. Today is the only chance we get, said Levi. There was only one way to know if he was telling the truth, so I yanked him with me in line with the other orange observers. We took off with the flow of traffic, and I made sure Levi's black smock was out of place when we arrived at the entrance to the first automation factory. Each observer had taken note of Levi when I scanned us in through the first door. Where are we going? This wasn't in the prophecy, said Levi. In, now, because if I get in trouble, then so do you. Heading up to the observation decks, Levi was shocked looking down at the production lines. I'd seen this plant every day, but it was the first time Levi saw how the world really worked. The numbers never said anything about murder, said Levi. His eyes gazed down at the rows of cows, chicken, and other livestock waiting for the electric zap that would be sent up their spines into their brains before the automated knives sliced their necks. What is this place? Asked Levi. He was frozen still. Never seen a processing plant. He shook his head no. Where do you think our meat comes from? We ran up to the catwalks, and I'm sure his observations were like mine the first time I'd seen it. It's gruesome to watch so many cows roll over and die, but once you understand the system and how we need food to survive, you'll be grateful that you're not the one dying on that line. He followed me all the way until the very last factory where workers were bending metal beams around automated machines. Hot rods were turning bright orange before being molded into the shape of the day. There, that's him, Manuka yelled up. Otto started climbing up the catwalk towards us. Is this the doctor? Asked Otto. Not even close, said Levi. Otto turned his head towards me. Where's your sister? We're leaving now. Machines were hammering down below. Only a couple more days and she'd die like the rest of them. This is the only way out, I paused. It's the only chance you two get. Otto ran down the steps to get Manuka before we helped her up to the catwalk toward the final door. Pressing my badge against the scanner, the automated door opened. Hey, stop! Yelled a voice behind us. A few orange observers had chased after us, where the three of them took hold of their pens to scribble new notes about our escape. Holding the door open, I let the others out first, and then I closed the door on my coworkers and winked. At least someone would remember how one man turned the other way. Manuka was struggling to keep up when Otto carried her over his shoulder. We ran off together with Levi wearing black, Otto and Manuka in blue, while I led our pack in orange. All of us were different, but all of us were the same because we were trapped in this system. Only time would tell if Levi's prophecy was true. Chapter 8. Order and Disorder. Blinking red dots watched from above as we ran down the dormitory hallways. Somewhere there was a film room, and somewhere they'd see a man in black, two workers in blue, all following me, and I had a feeling they knew exactly who was who. I didn't know all the colors, but I'd never seen blue in these halls. Wearing blue meant you were only one level above prison. That's why they had to work all day long. Orange was a good duty, but I couldn't tell if it was better or worse than black. Either way, once they found us missing, they'd link everything back to my observer's badge. Suddenly Manuka fell to her knees. Vomit spewed through her fingers when the repercussions of my actions were coming to life. I'd broken the law, and now 3 random people were slowing me down. She needs water, said Otto. No time, Levi responded. We were on the 6th column and close to the 50th row. Over here. I live on the 56. Otto went to pick her up while Levi stared down the hall. I led the group inside my room, and the red dot began recording. We don't have much time. If we miss the moon, then it's all for nothing, said Levi. And what about the cameras? The white man knows by now. The camera's eye was flashing above the door when Levi jumped up to punch it sideways. Plastic components crashed down, but the red light kept blinking until he ripped the electronics apart. "It's not real! It's just a battery and a light," said Levi. His hands were fidgeting through the electronics, breaking it to pieces, like a madman about to get caught. "They want you to think someone is watching. That's the point," said Levi. He spiked the components down, and the red dot stopped. "Look around," said Levi. "Who's coming to get you?" It was silent while Manuka's head stayed sideways under the faucet as cool water poured out over her neck. Otto was rubbing her back, but his eyes never left my bed. I remember the first time I saw a real bed too, and now his eyes wandered to the mirror where he caught a reflection of a man he never knew. "You look like you saw a ghost, man. Wake up, buddy. We gotta move," said Levi. Manuka's legs wobbled before she rested her head on Otto's chest. Without hesitation, Otto lifted her around his back, ready to carry her forward. "Do you need anything?" asked Levi. "Maybe a favorite book, or another smock? We're not coming back." He pointed to the notebooks piled below my bed and stacked up around the sides of my room. But if there was one thing I'd take, then I knew it was buried inside my mattress. I dove under the bed, scattering books and pages everywhere. I reached up into the foam mattress and pulled out the hidden dagger wrapped in my canvas scroll. "What is it?" asked Levi. "My dad found it with my grandfather when he passed. It's an arrowhead." I could feel the edges of the stone inside the blank canvas. It was still sharp. Some nights I'd think about it when I fell asleep. Other nights I'd hold it against my neck in case the morning jolt was meant to take me home. But lately, I've been wondering if I'd need it to attack. Otto carried Manuka while we ran down the hallways as every red dot watched. I tried to keep up, but my burning legs stumbled between steps. My body was still exhausted from yesterday. Then I heard Otto's feet pounding with Manuka on his back, and the further we got, the more determined he became. He'd groan while he held her up, but something inside this man would not quit. None of us had ever worn a suit, so none of us had seen our family in years, but I wondered how long it had been since they'd seen theirs. All our stories were sad if we were on the run, lost souls at best, because not a single one of us belonged here, and yet there was one girl in green who made me believe in some place better. The hallway curved, and their eyes feasted upon the very last door. "Is that it?" asked Levi. "This one." I opened the door on her right, inside door number 28, and to my surprise Jane was pacing back and forth with a big sunflower in her hands. Her smile turned to shock when she saw the others. "Oh, didn't know you were bringing friends," said Jane. "I'm Jane, and meet the flowers." We tumbled into the dirt while Jane extended her arms to introduce the shrubbery. Trying to catch our breath, Jane peeked outside and closed the door behind us. "Oh dear, you look a bit ill," she said. "Is this the doctor?" asked Otto. "Well, I wouldn't say I'm a medical professional, but I know a bit about the cure." "Have a seat on the silk," smiled Jane. I was panting on all fours, trying to catch my breath. "It's beautiful," said Levi. "It's even better than the numbers said." Otto was in shock as he touched a plant. "What's wrong?" asked Jane. "What are you feeling?" "Dizzy most of the time. Everything is weak and I can't hold food down. I just need a little time to breathe," said Manuka. "Well, air is good for starters, but I've got an idea too," said Jane. She started meandering through the rows of sprouts, and every so often she'd pluck something out from the dirt. Marching those big red boots through the entire patch, Jane found a couple roots, some leaves, and a few plants to slice up on a slab of wood. "What's all this? She needs the medicine." "Do you have any pills?" said Otto. "Pills are good for surgery and killing you after. This is turmeric and ginger," said Jane, mixing the two in a glass of water. "And here's a couple squirts of lemon, because every body needs a little vitamin C, and a couple carrots and chickpeas, because they're easy on the tummy." Manuka sipped the water while we got settled into the room. "Well, how long is everyone staying?" asked Jane with a hopeful smile. "We can't stay," said Levi. "We're going." "Already? But you just got here," said Jane. "And you're coming too," I added. "This is the badge man, the one I was telling you about yesterday." Levi was the center of attention now. Everyone was wondering what else he knew. "Right. So what's his story again? And do you think we can trust him?" "He seems a bit sketchy wearing all black," said Jane. I thought she said it to me, but she was whispering with a vine hanging beside her shoulder. Then Jane reached inside her coat to rub a stone that no one could see. Okay, so where do I start? Said Levi. How about right from the beginning? Demanded Jane. Well, I read numbers, and I connect each number like a puzzle piece at certain times of the day depending on where the stars and moon are at. I can't predict the future, but I can look ahead for patterns, or even back in time because that's what programmers do. Each number is like a hint, and when the hints come together, you get a message. Just a few days ago, the clues started connecting to a Mowgli, and that's how I knew about your garden, said Levi, pointing to Jane. Are you sure it wasn't a wild daydream? I do that from time to time, asked Jane. No, this wasn't a dream. Everyone's been waiting for the man who sets us free, said Levi. Who? Asked Manuka. Levi turned his head to look at me. The prophecy called him Yamantaka, the destroyer of death. I think it starts with him, he said. Oh, I knew you were a catch, said Jane. She reached into her pockets and pulled out 2 stones that fit snug in each of her palms. And I want you to have these, Mowgli. It's a present, because I liked you first, and you were the only one who ever talked to me. These stones are called flint, and they'll tell you the story of the flame, said Jane. Dashing them together, an orange spark jumped alive in front of us. Then she set the flint stones in my hand. Okay, now about these numbers. Are they real? Asked Jane. Yes, it's real. It's a prophecy, and it talked about you too, said Levi. Well, at least your story's getting better, said Jane. Now where do we fit into your prophecy, and how does it end? Well, I don't know where it ends, but it started by saying that an orange observer would visit me about a badge that wasn't broken. It told me how he met you, and how you had a tunnel to the outside, said Levi. And what happens outside? Said Jane. There's a mystical pyramid waiting, or it's coming down from the sky, or maybe up through the earth, but it's coming real soon, because somewhere inside the pyramid is the girl that saves the world, said Levi. Jane was stunned. I think I've heard this before, said Manuka. Why outside? Disorder, answered Levi. It's everything the order isn't. And did it say what to look for? I asked. It gave me the time and the place, then the cycle of the full moon. Levi paused. It told me today's date, December... Manuka interrupted him. December 28th, 3082. That's it. How'd you know that? Said Levi. Well, my dad studied the moon, said Manuka. He memorized the cycles because he told me about a great pyramid too. I wasn't always a slave, you know. I used to live with him on the top of the order when he studied the Egyptians. He even showed me how they observed the stars. My dad said that ancient sages could communicate through the moon. He said it's called magic, because only a magician can find the pyramid. My dad went looking for it once, you know, but he never came back. And he's our magician, said Levi, pointing to me. He's the one who can summon it. Mowgli's going to find it. I was staring back at him while everyone stared at me. Okay, yeah. So, let me think about this for a minute. I paused and thought about it. So I've never done anything like that. And I didn't even know the moon was real. Usually I just observe factories and write things down. But I forgot my notebooks, so... There was a long, awkward silence. And what happened to your dad? Asked Jane. He disappeared after that, said Manuka. The order said he died. And that's when I started wearing blue. But he knew something the men in suits didn't. I'm sure of it, said Manuka. Okay, so let's get this straight. The universe brought us together because there's a pyramid that needs our help. And it's outside somewhere. Now, did it say where? Like, is it just out in the trees? Said Jane. You know, there's a lot of trees in the forest. I just know it's coming, said Levi, and I'm sure Mowgli can find it. I didn't have a clue what was happening. Was I dreaming? Maybe I was still asleep, about to miss my morning shift again. And why didn't you tell me you could summon magical pyramids? Whispered Jane. I don't know what he's talking about. I'm just an observer. But everything else came true, said Levi. You've got to believe. How am I supposed to find a pyramid if I don't even know what that is? Does it have 3 sides or 4? You can do it, said Otto. I trust you. Do you remember what I said about trust? Of course I remembered. His hand was pinned around my neck. Oh, and the numbers said to start where the wild mushrooms grow, said Levi. Bingo! I know just the mushrooms, said Jane. They're fungus. They like it dense and dirty. Little weirdos if you ask me, but I've seen some sprout by the streams. "So you'll take us there?" asked Levi. "Sure will," said Jane. Jane led us to the edge of her room where she uncovered her tunnel. But the more I studied Levi, the more I wondered about the dark bags under his eyes. He looked a little devilish, like maybe he was hiding something from us. "Hey, who'd you say your dad was again?" asked Jane. "His name was Ditto," said Manuka. "Oh, right. Never heard of him before," said Jane. Levi and I looked at each other. Did she say Ditto? Chapter 9. The way out is the way in. Otto, Manuka, and Levi were crawling through the tunnel, but all I kept thinking about was my bed. I had a home on the 56, and what about the food that came every night? Beef and bread were always on time after work. If I told the white man the truth, and how sorry I was for what I'd done, then maybe I could keep working. "Are you coming?" said Jane, holding the vines over the dirt tunnel. "No need to be nervous. Worst case, you die. And we're all dying anyway, right?" said Jane. I couldn't move until Jane kicked the back of my pants. I was shocked. No one ever touched my butt, and so I took off scurrying toward the others up ahead. And anything could crush me. For goodness sakes, we're on the edge of a drill. This patch was treacherous and dark, confusing and tight, with death looming from all sides. I could feel the danger hanging from above as dirt crumbled over my face. The vessel we were traveling in could slice me in half. Goodness, why'd I even risk it? Then I observed the light. It was up ahead, and there was some warmth coming from it. My new friends climbed out into open air, and all that was left was this light. Orange waves poured onto my face before my hands pulled the body through to the other side. An entire sun was floating in the sky. Oh, the sky! My mouth dropped open when I tasted fresh air. So bright and clean, I could see mountains over the forest. A stream was flowing because my ears could hear it. No more machinery, no more orders, and no more mounds of dead animals. Free at last! "Hey, someone's escaping!" yelled a voice. Behind us there was a giant gray wall built high into the sky. Towers of bricks, all without windows, protruded into the clouds. This wasn't a drill like they told us. We'd been living in a stronghold. Now one tiny guard was yelling down at us. "Oh, why don't you come down here and get us?" yelled Jane. "Run! Everyone scatter!" yelled Levi. "Don't scatter, you dummy," yelled Jane. "They're not coming down here. They're followers. They're terrified of the forest." Sure enough, the man alerted others before more guards stood atop the wall pointing at us, but it was too high for the soldiers to do anything. They watched us walk into the tall grass toward the tree line, and all they did was watch while we disappeared through the trees. "A little warning would have been nice," said Levi. "What? Them? They're harmless. One time a guard told me I'd die out here, so I ended up spending the whole night by the river just to prove him wrong," said Jane. "Then why don't they do anything?" asked Otto. "That's what happens when you follow someone's orders. It's always about someone else, not what's best for you. Hey, you guys should try bending the rules more often," said Jane. "I'll try," said Manuka, smiling. "That's the spirit. And what about you?" said Jane. Jane swung her hip into Otto. The playful thud didn't budge against his hefty frame. She bounced off him, but at least the big guy managed to crack a smile. "So what'd you do in there? Build stuff?" Jane asked him. Not quite," said Otto. "Hey, so what are we looking for? A spaceship?" asked Jane. "A mystical pyramid," said Manuka. "Right. Oh, and mushrooms. Yep, I know the perfect ones. Ever heard of purple ringers?" asked Jane. It was silent. "No?" Jane paused. "Wait, has anyone eaten wild mushrooms before?" "Only potatoes and bread," said Otto. "Sometimes meat if it's not rotten." Wait until you try these. It's a bit of a head rush at first. Then your legs turn to wet noodles, but after a few minutes you'll feel like an old tree walking in the woods," said Jane. She was one of the most bizarre people I'd ever met. "Hey, how'd you survive out here?" asked Levi. "Did you run into any beasts?" "Animals? I've seen a few, but never had a bone to pick with any of them. Most of them take a peek because they're curious, but that's all. You know, nobody wants to hurt anyone when you get down to the bottom of it." Jane turned back to the order, which was hidden beyond the trees now. "Even the order isn't so bad. I'm not really sure why they're so sick and twisted, but look at you guys. You changed, so that means they can change too," said Jane. "Did you ever come close to dying out here?" asked Levi. "Dying? Out here?" said Jane. "You've got it all wrong. We were dying in those walls, but out here, we're living." Jane stopped to pluck a dandelion from the dirt. She put it behind her ear and turned towards us with a peculiar smile across her face. "Listen up, everyone," she said. "Now I don't know what they taught you in the order, but life's one big experiment, and sometimes you've got to mix up your ingredients to see what happens." She paused, long enough to alert us that something else was on her mind. "And those mushrooms," Jane added. "Sometimes they get a bit intense, especially for newbies like you. As long as you stop worrying about stuff, then we'll all be fine." Rows of stones were swaying inside her coat with every word. The gems clinked against each other as she pointed toward the wilderness ahead. "This way," said Jane. I suppose I'm lucky I never heard voices like she did. Her body seemed normal, but her mind was more of a misfit. And now Jane danced along a stream to the hum of whatever tune she'd been singing while everyone else tiptoed nearby. I was staying keen to any threats. The Order warned us about this land. They said this ground was radioactive, filled with beasts that could rip your heart out with their saber teeth. I'd seen pictures of bears and wolves. I'd even heard rumors about bombs. But this forest was pure and untouched. The humans hadn't explored it in years. When the sun started to fade, I watched the last of the light descend into the blue sky before a bright white circle emerged overhead. A full moon was levitating when crickets started chirping. "We're almost there, and those mushrooms are close. I can smell them. Did I mention I've got the nose of a boar?" said Jane. A giant smile stretched from ear to ear as she pranced ahead. Levi was next to me when I tugged on his black coat. "Psst! Levi," I whispered. "What else did the numbers say about Jane?" He paused. "Not much. Just that she was a special one. The numbers called her a unicorn, but it didn't say why. All it said is she knew the way," said Levi. "I found the mushrooms!" yelled Jane. "Wahoo! Tons of them, too!" All of us came beside Jane as she curtsied towards the fresh patch of orange tops. A giant colony of mushrooms had sprouted between the moss and the trees. "They're glowing," said Otto. "Told you they're special, but these aren't purple ringers. They're more like orange bangers, or maybe copper zangers," said Jane. "What?" asked Levi. "Is she mental?" "Oh, come on. I'm having fun. You can name them if you want," said Jane. Plucking a medium-sized mushroom from the dirt, Jane tossed it in her mouth and started to chew. "Yep. I vote we call them orange bangers. What do you goons think?" She tossed a mushroom over to me. "You sure we can eat these?" asked Levi. "Of course. This is dinner. Have a bunch," said Jane. Otto bent down on his feet to examine the mushroom. The night was getting darker, and the orange tops began sparkling even brighter. A moment ago I thought we'd get lost in these trees, but now thousands of orange mushroom tops were illuminating a path through the woods. I looked down to the mushroom that was in my hand. The stem was squishy, but not as spongy as the top. Dirt hung on to the fungus's root while I brushed it clean and licked the cap's iridescent glow. "So what do we do?" asked Levi. "What do you do? You eat these mushies, and then Mowgli finds the pyramid. That's how your story goes, right?" said Jane. "It's a prophecy, and you should be more respectful. It's more like magic than anything else," said Levi. "Magic? You don't know anything about magic until you've eaten at least 3 of these," said Jane. I put the mushroom in my mouth and began to chew before I bent down to examine another patch of glowing mushroom heads. They were the freshest food I'd ever eaten, and so I copied everyone else by gathering 2 handfuls for dinner. "So one more time, has anyone eaten wild mushrooms before?" asked Jane. The entire group nodded no. "I was like you once, back when I listened to all the rules. Whatever the order stands for, these mushrooms teach you the opposite. There are no rules or numbers or laws to prepare you for this trip. It's too complex, even for a gardener," said Jane. "What's she talking about?" asked Manuka. I closed my eyes and swallowed another mushroom when a glowing sensation began to illuminate itself through my stomach. Some sort of light or energy was glowing through my insides. I hadn't eaten today, so maybe that's why I felt it echoing down my throat like a flashlight beaming into my belly. But why was I so sensitive to the wind passing through the trees? It was as if I heard the fresh air whispering. This breeze reminded me of something sincere, and then a moment later the wind picked up to greet me again. Something was different. Things were changing because something strange was happening. Different strands of light were coming into view. I rubbed my eyes and began to see how 4 strangers could look like family. "Trust the mushrooms," said Jane, holding up another. "It's something like the truth." She popped another mushroom in her mouth and chewed it down.